Thank you for your kind introduction. To begin with, I'd like to thank Shlomo and Sergey and the staff members of New Economic School for making this possible. It is a great honor for me to share my views on Korea's economic development with those who are in the same profession like you. Since I worked for the Korean government for more than 30 years, even if I teach at my alma mater, Seoul National University, I am sharing my view as an economic bureaucrat rather than a scholar. So please allow me not to go in depth theoretically. Mostly I really try to talk about economic policy making process during Korea's economic development process. Before I go into the substance of Korea's economic development, I'd like to share with you some background of Korea. In 1392, Joseon dynasty was founded, which lasted, Joseon dynasty, which lasted until 1910, when Korea was colonized by Japan. So as you see, Joseon dynasty lasted more than 500 years. And why Korea was colonized by Japan? We may say so many reasons for that, but in a word, Japan opened itself to the Western world while Joseon closed. That is the main reason. And when I speak to Japan, why Japan is experiencing difficulties over the past 2 decades, since 1990, Japan is now closed, while Korea is open. So that's not the topic of today. So colonized by Japan. And in 1945, as all of us know, the World War II ended, with Japan defeated. And thanks to that, Korea was liberated from Japanese colony. Then it took 3 years for Korea to found a republic. But unfortunately, Korean peninsula over Korea was divided into two, north and south. So in South Korea, the Republic of Korea was founded in August 1948. in North, Democratic People's Republic of Korea was founded. So ROK in South, DPRK in North. So two Koreas were founded in the same year, 1948. Because of that, complementarity on the Korean peninsula was lost. So that's the beginning of the story. So up to this, then two Koreas were founded. Two Koreas were founded in the same year, one in North, the other in South. This is the general background of Korea up to this point. Unfortunately, within less than 2 years, June 25th, 1950, within less than 2 years, Korean War broke out. Korean War broke out, and Korean Peninsula was devastated by the Korean War for 3 years, because Korean War lasted from June 25th till July 1953. So it lasted 3 years, which devastated Korean Peninsula, left virtually nothing economically. So this is the story. The founder of the Republic of Korea, South, was Dr. Lee, who studied at Princeton University, political science, and he became the founder of the Republic of Korea, while Kim Il-sung became the founder of North Korea, or DPRK. Because of the dispute of ideology between two Koreas, President Lee, even if he was educated well in the United States, could not put priority on economic development until the end of his term. He resigned in 1960 because of the student revolution. Since he remained president too long, the students demonstrated demanding his resignation. So he resigned in 1960, and 1 year later, in 1961, this is very important. In 1961, May 16th, you know, today, May 16th, is the 50th anniversary of this military coup or revolution. Still, we are debating. Was it a military coup, or was it a military revolution? But anyway, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of Korea's economic development. Two-star general, Mr. Park, called Mr. Park, two-star general, he took the power through the military coup. But even if the method, the way he took the power was not legitimate, he was welcomed by people. Why? Because he promised to overcome poverty. Overcome the poverty. In 1960, Korea's per capita income, Korea's per capita income was $79. You know the meaning of it? One average Korean had to live for 1 year, not 1 day, with this amount of money. In 1961, it became 82. In 1963, it became 100. Anyway, you can see the level of poverty in Korea until that point. So even if two-star General Park's way of taking the power was not legitimate, he was welcomed by people by promising overcoming the poverty. That's the background how Korea's economic development began. Until 1973, this is a very important year for Korea also. How come? You know the definition of poverty by the United Nations. You know that? How much is the poverty? Back then, the United Nations used to define poverty by $1 per day. If one country's per capita income reaches $1 per day, that country used to be regarded as a country which overcame poverty. Korea could reach that level, $1 per day, which means $365 per year, only in 1973, when Korea's per capita income reached $400. What does that mean? You are looking at Korea today, whose per capita income is about $20,000. So you may not want to believe this, but until 1973, Korea's per capita income was less than $1 per day, which means one of the poorest countries in the world. So Korea began its economic development when Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, if not the poorest country. That is the point I'm trying to share with you now.
What was the North Korean income of the 70s?
Good. Until then, South Korea was worse off than North Korea. In terms of per capita income, I mean, your answer is correct. Who knows the exact number? Because they don't reveal the exact number. But until then, North Korea was relatively less hidden than now. So we could sense some numbers until that point, because South Korea was worse off than North Korea until that point. So South Korea's goal was to catch up with North Korea until 1970. So this is flow income, annual product. So if we look at the stock over long period, probably in this year, South Korea might have caught up with North Korea. So this is the general comparison. So until 1973, South Korea may have been worse off than North Korea. we were not allowed to speak out such things back then. I was going to college, and if I speak out such numbers, say we were asked to follow someone. So that was the case. So this is the general overview about two Koreas. Now, today, say, why don't we compare two Koreas here? South, North. Population size. I'm talking about 2010. But North Korean numbers, we don't know. But say, we try to guess. At least South Korea, 49 million, close to 50 million. North Korea, as you said, who knows, but they say about 24 million. And per capita income, as I said, around 20,000 US dollars. And North Korea, we can guess at the most less than $1,000. Say $1,000. Then, which makes GDP, Korea's GDP size is about 1 trillion US dollars. And North Korea, million multiplied by 1,000 makes billion. So 24 billion. Here, about 1,000 billion. So you can see the comparison of two Koreas in terms of GDP size. Right? So these days, back in early 1970s, say we were competing with each other. But these days, in terms of GDP size, say it's not possible to compare with two Koreas on the Korean Peninsula. If you see the news, probably you may hear the news about North Korean leader Kim Jong-il more than South Korean leader President Lee Myung-bak, because North Korean leader Kim Jong-il is always on the news by doing what? By developing nuclear weapons. Can you see the point here? If not, if he doesn't develop the nuclear weapon, who in the world would pay attention to North Korea? Many of them are starving to death because of poverty, but nobody wouldn't pay attention to North Korea. That's why he is always drawing attention from the world by claiming we are developing a nuclear weapon. So we can see the behind the story about the development of nuclear weapon by North Korea. That's not today's topic. So up to this point, I was trying to share with you the background of Korea, why two Koreas, and the comparison of two Koreas on the Korean Peninsula. This is just an appetizer, so I will go into the main dish. How Korea has developed its economy from that point. Let me summarize once again. In 1961, it was $79. In 1963, it became 100. 73, it became 400. 77, it became 1,000. 95, it became 10,000. This is the story I'm going to share mainly today. So the Korean economy's per capita income began from virtually nothing, reached 10,000 level in 1995. Then at this point, say this is the topic for Wednesday, but at this point, Koreans became complacent. Wow, we can do whatever we want to do. So Koreans began to spend more than they deserved. So it took around 30 plus years to establish Korea's economic development. But it took only 3 years to destroy it. So in December 1997, we had to go to the IMF to request the bailout program. You know what it means by IMF program? We call it IMF program to make it look decent. But the IMF program is nothing but a bailout request to the IMF. A request for money, because Korea was short of foreign reserve holdings to pay, so Korea had to request the money from the IMF while giving up the sovereignty, economic policy making. Once you borrow money from the IMF, you have to give up the sovereignty of the economic policy making. Because the IMF executive board is to recommend what to do once one country borrows money from the IMF. So what lesson can we learn from this experience? We can learn this lesson. You know, failure is mother of success, right? Say you fail and you make more endeavors, more efforts, and eventually you succeed. That's what scientists are doing every day. They fail so many times, at the end they succeed. So failure is mother of success. But in the end, there's another clause which we usually forget. This is one lesson I want to share with you today, which means success is father of failure. If you succeed, people tend to become complacent. Then you are to fail later on. So this story, this Korea's failure story, gives us some lesson to avoid. If you become complacent with your success, then the next step, you can hardly avoid a failure story. That's the lesson. Okay. Then next, how? Korea's development strategy I'd like to discuss next. Then how Korea could develop its economy from less than $100 to $10,000 or recently $20,000. So mainly I cover up to this, but it is also valid until now. But let me describe like this. Number one, the most important development strategy Korea accepted during its development process was this is very important, unbalanced growth strategy. Unbalanced. You understand what this means? With limited resources available, with less than $100, however much you may save, still the fund to invest is not enough. So we have to pick up the potential winner. Which industry can become a winner? So instead of promoting all the industries, we try to pick up the potential winner and we put all the resources available to such picked up industries. In the beginning, for example, textile industry for Korea, light industry. So as time goes on, then we transferred from light industry to heavy and chemical industry. But basically, unbalanced growth strategy means with limited resources available, we didn't try all the industries. We didn't try to promote all the industries. So that's the most important part. That's the most important part of Korea's development strategy. While North Korea adopted so-called balanced growth strategy. They tried to promote all the industries based upon 주체 ideology. We have to produce everything we need domestically. That's the difference between two Koreas. Number two, say the only resource Korea had at the time was human resources, human beings. Say, still we don't have any resources available. We don't produce any single barrel of oil these days. We import 100% of oil from abroad. So we had only one resource, human beings. So we tried to manufacture anything we can to export instead of to consume domestically. So another strategy was outward looking strategy, growth strategy. In other words, export-led growth strategy. So still, Korea remains the same. We put priority on export promotion. So that's number two. Number three, how did we finance? How Korea financed there were two ways. Number one, say we borrowed money from abroad, which means foreign loan. Another, we printed money supply. So how did we finance the necessary investment? Number one, we borrowed money from abroad. Why we didn't allow foreigners to invest in Korea? Because back then, so-called dependency theory prevailed. You learn in your class what the dependency theory means. Once you allow foreigners to invest in your market, and your industry will depend upon foreign investors. That was the story back then. These days, it isn't valid. Most people share. Still, there are some people who claim dependence theory, but in most cases. So we used to borrow money from abroad. We used to print money by the central bank. Number 4, government-led growth strategy. So I will just summarize those 4 development strategies. Number 1, unbalanced growth strategy. Number 2, outward-looking or export-led growth strategy. Number 3, how to finance. Either print money or borrow money from abroad. Number 4, all the elite used to join the public sector, so government-led growth strategy. We know Dr. Milton Friedman, who passed away, he used to claim there is no such a thing as a free lunch. So thanks to these development strategy, Korean economy could develop from less than $100 to $10,000 or $20,000. Then we may have to pay the price for that. So, so-called side effect. If we call this development strategy, then there must be some price for us. Either we paid in the past, or we are paying today, or we may have to pay in the future. So we have to discuss those side effects of those development strategies. You know, unbalanced growth strategy brought us what? You may see in Russia too, right? Because of that, then so-called GAP. So some people misunderstand this as a bridging gap. This is not a bridging gap. The gap in the society. The gap between the rich and the poor. The gap between the urban area and the rural area. The gap between the big conglomerates and small and medium enterprises. So this makes the society unstable. Yeah. Number 2, because of this outward-looking or export-led weak domestic demand. So still domestic market is very weak in Korea. Especially this year, in 2011, Korea's GDP size is about $1 trillion US, and Korea's trade volume, both export and import together, trade volume is going to be about $1 trillion US. So you see, so-called trade dependency, right? So Korea's GDP size is about the same as Korea's trade volume, which is good when the global economy is booming, which is bad when the global economy is in recession. Right? You see the point. Right? So this, as a result of this export-led industry, growth strategy, then weak domestic demand. You know, foreign loan makes us what? Foreign debt, external debt. External debt. Why am I emphasizing this? Because of this, we had to go to the IMF to request the bailout program. Because of the external debt that we couldn't repay in late 1990s, we had to borrow money from the IMF. The IMF, as you know, is the last resort to borrow money. If you cannot borrow money from anywhere else in the world, then you go to the IMF, giving up your economic policy sovereignty. That's what IMF is. That's why IMF was founded back in 1946, right after the World War II. So external debt and money supply, you know what it brings to us, right? Inflation. So those are. Next, government-led strategy may bring us what? What do you think? Corruption. So if the relationship between the government officials and the business community is too close, there is room for corruption. So those are the things I wanted to share. So Korean economy began here, from here, and developed up to this point, and then it had to go to the IMF. Then how come Korea's economy could develop so rapidly, so fast? Thanks to those 4 development strategies or growth strategies. But even if we could develop the Korean economy with those growth strategies, we had to pay the price for that in terms of gap in the society, in terms of weak domestic demand, in terms of external debt, inflation, and room for corruption. So that's the summary of Korea's economic development and side effect. Next, what made this possible for Korea? What made this possible for Korea? From a different perspective. Number 1, top leaders' strong commitment. I talked about two-star General Park. His commitment to overcoming poverty was very, very strong. And he was, not including his surrounding aides, staff members, himself, he was free from corruption until his death. So his children are not well off these days. So his strong commitment, top leaders' strong commitment to the economic development was very strong. And his promise at the outset of the military coup was kept. That's why these days people cannot blame him for the military coup, because even if the ways to take the power was not legitimate, the outcome was desirable. So these days more people claim it has to be called the military revolution rather than military coup. That's number 1. Number 2, he created, if you see this, May 16th, 1961 and July 22nd in the same year, he created, you see, just in about 2 months, he created an institute called Economic Planning Board. As I understand, Russia has also the Ministry of Economic Development, right? Maybe the same, maybe similar, if not the same. So he created, in just 2 months or so, Economic Planning Board. Number 1, the Minister of Economic Planning was the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of economic policy making, and he chaired the economic ministers' meeting. And in terms of economic policy, not Prime Minister, but this Deputy Prime Minister used to be in charge. And there, then if you see the sequencing, the first 5-year plan from 1962, 1966 began. If you see the date, the first 5-year plan began on January 1st of 1962. You can see how many days they had to prepare for the first 5-year economic development plan. So President himself presided export promotion meeting every month, and he chaired himself every month the economic monitoring meeting. So the president commitment, and he founded this institution with budget. So this minister is deputy prime minister with budget, the national budget. So strong institution was founded. So that's number 2. Say, top leaders' strong commitment to the economic development. Number 2, very efficient institution called EPB. EPB now later it became merged with the Ministry of Finance, so it became the Ministry of Finance and the Economy. But it lasted. So the first 5-year plan, and it lasted up to 7th 5-year plan. But interestingly, from 5th 5-year plan, it changed the name from Economic Development Plan to Socio-Economic Development Plan. Socio-Economic Development Plan, meaning how to narrow the social gap, how to narrow the gap in the society became more important. So you can see that. That's number 2. Number 3, I want to emphasize education. And I know the reputation of New Economic School, not only in Russia, but also in the world. It's becoming more and more famous in the world. And your education is contributing to the economic development of Russia and to the global economy. Education, I want to go a little bit more when I talk about education. Yes, education is important, but can you show me the evidence of the importance of education? I will share. I'd like to share with you. Say, the evidence of education in Korea's economic development. Back in 1970s, for example, Korean authorities, Korean government began to promote heavy and chemical industries. You know, Korea's major export items these days, you know, automobile, you know, semi-IT industry, right? Say Samsung Galaxy phones or TVs, and shipbuilding. You see the relationship between education and those industries. Back in 1970s, high school graduates used to apply to those departments. Department of Machinery, which makes Korea's automobile industry one of top 5. Department of electricity engineering or electronics. Back then, electronics was not so popular, so electricity. Later on, electronic engineering, and chemical engineering, and shipbuilding. You know, can you see the point? Because back then, those who were good, those eminent students used to apply to those departments. Machinery department, chemical engineering department, shipbuilding engineering department, and electrical engineering department. That made Korea's major export items today. So you study market economy here at NES ahead of other schools. So you are going to be leaders of Russia or Russia's business community with your knowledge obtained ahead of others. So this is the direct relationship between education and one nation's future industry or future industry's competitiveness. So this is the story I want to share. Of course, lastly, I think I have to mention favorable external environment. In other words, Korea was lucky because during that period, the world economy was booming. So number one, top leaders, strong commitment. Number two, say strong institution. Number three, education. Number four, favorable external environment. Those factors I want to mention when we talk about, say, what made it possible for Korea to develop so fast, say, together with this development strategy. Boring? Following? Okay. Then, say, I'd like to use this to summarize what I have discussed so far. I want to begin with this. I covered pretty much overview of the Korean economy before the development. Japanese colonization, liberation in 1945, and division. So we lost complementary, and Republic of Korea and DPRK in the same year, when Korean War broke out, and President Lee couldn't put priority on economic development due to the ideology dispute. So this is the case. And let me go back to this. So I briefly covered, say, two Koreas. Geographically, South Korea is a little bit smaller than North Korea. We are about the same, but 100,000 square kilometers in south and 120,000 square kilometers in north. Population-wise, 49 million versus 24 million, and say per capita income-wise, 20 versus 1,000, which makes 1 trillion versus 23 or 4. So these days, life expectancy in South Korea is above 80, while North Koreans' life expectancy is less than 70 because of malnutrition. And before the development, I don't need to explain, in these days, Korean economy became 5th in the world, per capita income 20, say export-driven and improved quality of life. And I'd like to share this one. Say, we already covered pretty much here, right? Say in 1960, 79, it became 100. In 1963, became 1,000 in 1977, and it became 11,000 in 1995, and the Koreans became complacent, and it fell down to 7,000 level in 1998. So you know why I said success is father of failure. So because of this success, Koreans became complacent, and failure followed. This is. And we spent a lot of time to recover to this level. And so 6 5-year economic development plans. Actually, we had 7, we will see. And I want to compare other economies. Right? Russia, 140 million people, and 10,000 per capita income makes close to $5 trillion. And Korea here, and say, you can see USA, say 310 million, and about close to $15,000, which makes close to $15 trillion. I'd like to share with you one interesting topic. You know how many people live in the world? About 6.5 billion people. About 6.5 billion people. You know, the gross product of the world, you never thought about it. So about 65 trillion. So if the world is just one country, what's the per capita income? Trillion divided by billion means K, right? 1,000. 65 divided by 6.510. So what does that mean? The world's per capita income is about $10,000. What is Russia? So Russia is about the average of the world. Then does it belong to the median? No. Close to 1 billion people are under subsistence, belong to the poverty level. Why? Let me show you the answer. Why? You see here, out of 65 trillion, you see here, USA, 15 trillion. Next, EU. I mean, it doesn't have all EU. EU is about the same as the US. EU, about 300 million people, about 45,000 per capita income. So if the US GDP is 15 trillion, EU probably 13 to 14 trillion. Japan, as you see here, where's Japan? Here. Japan, you see here, 5.5 trillion. So if you add US 15, EU 13, Japan 5, which makes 50% of the global production. So only 300 million, 1.3 million, only 7.5 million or so are producing 1/2 of the global GDP. So that's why 1 billion people are under the poverty level. You see the point? This is an interesting analysis. If you now that you are studying economics, you can see the world. And so Russia's 10,000 per capita income is way above the median, because those 3 groups own virtually 1/2 of the global production. Okay, that's not topic of today's Korean economics. So now it's just I wanted to share, say, what countries are so-called top 15 economies in the world. Very interesting changes in employment and industrial. In 1960, farmers used to represent 2/3. So 2 out of 3 workers used to be farmers. But they contributed to the Korean economy 1/3. So their productivity, agricultural industry's productivity is just 1/2 of the total industry. But these days, farmers represent less than 7%. They contribute less than 3%. So manufacturing sector, 7%, 17% are employed in the manufacturing sector, but 30% contribution to the GDP. So you see the drastic change of employment and industrial structure of the Korean economy. And this will pretty much recover, right? So I wanted to share with you this. And the policies, just say, well, today I don't have enough time because I want to discuss this later on Wednesday. Lessons from Korea's experience. I want to share this point. Human resources development and ownership, this one, and building good institutional environment. How come? But I just wanted to share with you the challenges facing the Korean economy. But let me go back to this point, the role of top leadership. President Park, strong leadership commitment to economic development and the partnership with big businesses, largely free from corruption and interest group pressure. And he used to monitor, he used to chair, say, economic conditions review meetings, and he always, say, used to chair, say, export meetings every month. Next, say, strong planning agency, economic planning board, I mentioned this, say, development plans, policy coordination among economic ministries. So the Minister of Economic Planning used to be Deputy Prime Minister, chairing economic ministers' meetings, and he used to be President's top economic advisor, and including the budget. So, say, control of mobilizing and distributing foreign capital. In the past, I mentioned foreign capital used to mean foreign loans rather than FDI. FDI was introduced after the Asian financial crisis. And, so, 5-year plans. This one I wanted to share. Say, LCD, so IT industry, say 50% market share. Shipbuilding, number 2 in the world. Semiconductor, say number 1. Automobile, number 5. These industries could become, say, globally competitive thanks to the education back in 1970s and 80s, because many talented high school graduates used to apply to those departments. So then, in 30 years or so, say, those industries became globally competitive. So if you look at Russia, see, Russia's high school graduates apply to which department most? Those departments, those majors will determine Russia's future cash cows, or future, say, promising industries. Can you see the analogy there? So that's the point I wanted to make. So this is the changing export structure, as you see here. We used to export agricultural products at first, but these days heavy and chemical industry products are overriding. So that's the point. And I want to share this. Say, too much exaggerated the success stories of Korean economy. So you may misunderstand. I may have misled you. Wow, Korean economy is wonderful. No, there are so many problems facing the Korean economy. If not problems, issues, they are, say, growth potential is slowing down. We used to grow over 5% a year. These days, it's harder to grow, say, 4 to 5%. This year's target is 5%, but actually the growth potential is declining. We can see. That's one point. And the problem, this is the most serious problem actually. Even if the economy grows, it doesn't create jobs. In 2009, the job declined. The job declined. So we were shocked. You know, the same in the world. Say, youngsters come out of school. You graduate from New Economic School, and if you cannot find jobs, I mean, New Economic School graduates don't have any problems finding jobs, but you are in much demand. But say, on average, suppose Russian college graduates, many of them can hardly find their jobs. If that is the case, then that's a real problem. So, growth without job creation is a problem. And another issue is aging and low fertility. I wrote a book called Prepare 30 Years After Your Retirement, and this has become one of the best sellers these days. So I don't worry about my food, thanks to that. Why? Because Koreans became to live longer while giving birth to less children. So as we grow older, no youngsters to support our elderly age. So it's going to be a social issue, not an individual issue. And income distribution, the gap, I talked about already that. And say, public and household debts and global finances, not only Korea, but also every country in the world. You know, globalization? What do you mean, globalization? To me, globalization means the globe has become a village. The globe used to be very huge. It took a while for us to fly to the US. But these days, say, you can, say, for example, for me, I can take a flight in the morning in Seoul, then fly to Washington, D.C., and have a luncheon appointment. Because I can fly to Washington, D.C. using time gap between two areas. So the globe has become a village. So whatever happens in the United States, say, it influences on virtually everything in Korea, in Russia, in the world. So we cannot avoid this. Finally, if I may, I want to just briefly share the changing role of Korea in the global community. Korea used to receive foreign aid. You know, during the Korean War, I was born during the Korean War. And my father died as a soldier during the Korean War. So I didn't see my father. Even if he died 1 year after I was born, I couldn't see my father. And so we could survive. And after the war, we could survive the foreign aid. But these days, we try to become a donor. And officially, Korea has become a donor country of the OECD members. We used to receive technical assistance in terms of capacity building, in terms of, say, trainees overseas, sending trainees overseas. But these days, Korea is trying to share its development experiences with other developing countries. And so we receive trainees. I teach at Central Government Officials Training Institute virtually once every month. And we invite government officials from mainly ASEAN countries, and we train them there to share our experiences. And we used to borrow money from abroad, and these days we can supply money. But most importantly, as I mentioned before, we really benefited from the favorable external environment. And Korea used to be a small member country in the global community, and it is becoming one of the major players, or at least playing a bridging role. One example being G20 host and chair back in November last year. So Korea was the first country that hosted the G20 summit in November last year among developing economies. So we try to include one agenda called the development agenda, claiming by giving aid to developing economies, we cannot help them at all. We can help them only when we share development experiences with developing countries. We can really help them. That's the logic behind the adoption of development agenda into the G20 summit. I think pretty much I covered what I had in mind up to this, except the restructuring process of during the financial crisis. That's the topic I will cover on Wednesday. And why don't I stop here and we open the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Yes.
You have said that there was created a special department, economic planning board. But did its maybe its head or its economists who worked there, did they use some macroeconomic models? Was there some theoretical base in the actions, or it was just something only practical?
Very good point. Yes, in a even back then, economic theory in the area of economic policy making was not that much developed. Even if Professor Jong Nam didn't know how to make the economic policies.
61.
But there were very, very few economists trained in the U.S. Handful. So we begged those Koreans who studied economics in the States at a PhD level, we begged them to come back to do this. But as you see, Economic Planning Board is a government agency. Therefore, it couldn't pay much. So until 1970, virtually all of the economic PhDs who came back from abroad used to be professors and advised the government as part-timers. You see the point? But as time goes by, we thought it was not enough. It was not adequate. So Korea founded a research institute called Korea Development Institute, KDI, in 1971. And we paid several times as much as the government officials were paid. You see the point? So they came. And we respected them, we paid them a lot, so they became full-time economic researchers, which provided advice to the government officials in the economic planning. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
So we adopted models, but in a probably back then very premature. But yes, we used to rely on macroeconomic models.
You know, on this point, is it President Park who established this program of sending Korean students for PhDs in economics abroad?
Yes, yes. That's later.
Later?
But at the beginning, we had to invite Koreans who studied economics at a graduate level. But later on, we began to send. I was one of them who was sent to the States to study economics at a graduate level. Yeah. But at time sequence. But his question was, at the beginning, did EPB use the macroeconomic model? The answer was yes, but it must be not mature enough. Yes. Yes.
One maybe related question about the education. You have also mentioned that one of the most important factors of the Korean success was that talented young people went to some departments which became the leading export industries later.
Yes.
But if Korea was a very poor country, how could it have a very good education system? So why these students were well prepared, and why could they become leaders who was able to develop the country?
Very good point. Very good point. Back then, in 1970s, those who applied to those departments, because the government announced to promote heavy and chemical industries, the students wanted to major in those subjects. Did they know those industries would become globally competitive in 30 years or so? They didn't. I don't think. In retrospect, we analyze. Then they did well to have chosen. But they must have been wondering whether it would be wise to major in this subject. I think so. Rather than studying medicine. But many talented high school graduates applied to those subjects believing that those picked up industries would become winners in the future. And it worked. Is it going to work in all the developing countries? I don't know, frankly. Nobody knows. Say, I mentioned Korea was lucky to have favorable external environment. This may have been the most important factor, I have to confess. Say, these days, virtually all the economies are emerging as developing economies. The competition becomes more and more fierce. And which country is going to win in what industry, I don't think nobody can tell. And we were lucky, in a sense, to have such a favorable external environment. And those students who picked up those subjects, believing the government promotion policy, they were lucky in retrospect.
But you still needed a lot of shipbuilding engineers, you know, you needed all this, so that whether the level of education in Korea at this point, this is the question, was enough, and then in 1670s.
Yes, in retrospect, yes. But, you know, the first shipbuilding order, the founder of Hyundai received without any shipyards. So, in a sense, it was probably it was a venture, I guess. And we didn't know that, we were so skillful. Shipbuilding not only shipbuilding engineers, but also shipbuilding technicians we need. Right? Do you agree? Say, handful engineers plus so many technicians we need to build a ship. Right? So I'm trying to be very frank. Anybody else? Too easy to understand? I explained too easily. I should have made it a little bit a graduate level. Okay, see, that's my tendency. I try to explain all the things, say, in easy terms, so that middle school graduate can understand.
What is now? Where are the Korean students now? What do they study? What are the most popular disciplines?
Very good point. Very good point. You help me. Always. You know, K-pop. You don't know K-pop? You don't know K-pop? I see. So you seem to study too much. Huh? These days, if you type K-pop on the internet, you'll see so many K-pop stars. It's being spread so widely these days. I mean, Korean pop singers. I mean, amazing. And filmmakers. Why? Because in 1990s, many talented high school graduates began to study filming, arts, music, so which made Hallyu or K-pop, etc. possible. So these days, I think Korea's future is going to be on arts.
But it's not very export-driven industry.
Export-driven a lot. It exports in terms of value added,
yeah,
very much. You know, so far.
To China.
Huh?
To China.
No, you wouldn't believe it. Say, in France, K-pop, say, in Latin America, say, if you look at, you seem to study too much. Say, enjoy your life for a little bit. Say. So, what youngsters study will make a country's competitiveness in the future. That's what I try to plan. And say, Professor Weber asked me what Korean youngsters are studying these days. Those art majors are extremely increasing. So say we try to find export industry in the tertiary industry. That's what I was trying to say. So very interesting. The industry is really changing. So even if you major in economics, please try to see other area as well, because you are going to live the whole 21st century. Because your life expectancy is more than 100 years. Now, you will not live.
Huh?
Not in Russia. No. I'm talking about these youngsters.
They're still in Russia.
So whatever you study,
What it is now, 60s.
whatever you study, in your 20s, will become, if not useless, but less useful in the near future. So if you think of your vision at the age of 50, say what you study here at NES is not going to be valid much. So you have to keep watching economics plus others. That's my recommendation. He's not happy with that because he sticks
I'm always happy, no.
So my recommendation to the next generation is don't stick to your major. Your major is here, but say you have to look at other areas as well to be competitive.
So on this message of happiness.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.